All right. It's the show is What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Radio, WLGR. And my guest today, who has become a recurring guest, is Dr. Clarence Taylor, Baruch College and the CUNY Graduate Center. And Dr. Taylor is published many books, including Fight the Power, African Americans and the Long History of Police Brutality in New York City, Civil Rights in New York City from World War II to the Giuliani Era, and Black Religious Intellectuals, the Fight for Equality from Jim Crow to the 21st Century. And he's back on today to talk about the Black Lives Movement, the impact it's had this year on the elections, and now what we are going to be experiencing as we move towards the Biden presidency. Although today is a big day for that, as far as how we move forward, right, Dr. Taylor?
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you for having me back.
Thanks for coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess before the show started, we were talking a little bit about that it's, some point today, there's the Michigan election is going to be certified, or they're going to attempt to certify it. And there is a question as to whether or not that's going to happen. And I was also seeing that there are in the talks about bringing some of the folks from Pennsylvania to the White House to talk about the certification of the Pennsylvania election. But tell us a little bit about how do you see the post-election and how things have been going thus far, Dr. Taylor?
Sure. Well, as everyone knows, Joe Biden received more votes than any other presidential candidate in history.
Yep.
The other point that people should recognize, Donald Trump received the second largest number of votes.
Yes, he reminded us of that in a press conference he did a few days ago.
Right. So while many people thought this was going to be a runaway, that Biden was going to just trounce Trump, that was not the case. And this clearly notes that his brand of American nationalism is alive and well in the United States. Now, of course, we don't have the exact results. We can only go by exit polls and how people told us how they voted. But all the talk about the suburban white mom didn't turn out to be the case. It seems that white women voted in a larger percentage for Trump than they did in 2016. Trump received about 57% of the white vote, while Biden received 42%. These according to exit polls. These polls, of course, can change. But it does indicate that the Republican Party is a party, as seen as a party for white Americans. And all the discussion about Blacks and Latinos and Asians, Trump getting a greater percentage of Black and Latino votes is overplayed. It's overplayed because what they really don't look at is real numbers. So, yeah, one could talk about the percentage going up a little among Blacks and Latinos, but what people ignore, like MSNBC and all the corporate media when they are pushing that line, is the fact that larger numbers of Blacks and Latinos came out to vote. In particular, the Latino vote really increased in this election compared to 2016. So Biden won because of the Black vote, because of the Latino vote, because of the Asian American vote, because of the Native American votes. So, and places like Arizona, right? Latinos came out in large numbers in support of it. So people can point to Florida, but you got to look at places like Arizona. You got to look at places like Nevada, even places like Illinois and so forth. This is I think, the major dilemma that we sort of face when looking at the results of this election. The United States is clearly divided on racial lines, and I think this election pointed out that that has intensified. And there seems to be this whole argument about Trumpism. And, and like I said, corporate media has been pushing this line. We're celebrating that, essentially we got rid of Trump, and so therefore Trumpism, and the Republican Party can go back to being its normal self. Well, the reality is Trump is a symptom of the Republican Party. The party's been heading in this direction for some time. So despite the fact that you have, people like the Lincoln Project, these are the folks who pushed the campaign to defeat Trump, and they spent a lot of money putting on ads. The reality is that the alliance that Trump put together seems to be steady. And that alliance consists of economic conservatives. It consists of folks who are in the Christian right. And more importantly, it also consists of white supremacists. And they came out in huge numbers. And that's what people missed in 2016 when looking at Trump, right? So, so the election is pointing to this. It also points to, there is a class divide also. Besides the racial divide, there is a class divide, because that racial divide means that many of those whites who voted for him, white members of the working class, voted in large numbers for Donald Trump. Now, a lot of that may be because of their racial identity, but it also may be because of their economic concerns. So that they are hurting like loads of other folks, members of the working class. And they just didn't trust the Democratic Party to deliver for them. And so what I think, if there is not an attempt to solve the raging economic crisis as well as a pandemic crisis, Trump can come back in 2024, or even worse, we can get someone who is more articulate, a lot smarter, and a lot more ruthless than a Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have you on, and then I have on this guest I told you about, my friend Chris C.J. Hopkins from Berlin, who's a satirist, and he was, one of the things he pointed out that is if that Trump had all of these tools to truly, kind of slam down a kind of a ruthless dictatorship of sorts here in the country, but he did not utilize it. And so, like you're saying, if we got somebody smarter in next time, it could be, things certainly could be worse. We obviously he has not conceded that he was defeated. He's not conceded the election. And so as a result, there's a lot of Republican political figures who continue to kind of humor him as far as whether or not, he needs to step down. And there are a lot of folks on the fence about why that is. They're fearful of what his base would do to them if they did not support him. But obviously, some people are starting to come around. And the next real fear is that Trump is going to become a force behind the scenes by possibly developing something like, let's say, a media empire and a financial political empire, that could then help support somebody like, let's say, a Mark Rubio. I mean, this is some of the things I heard this morning on CNN. So yeah, they're going to come back in 2024. But we think a lot about what they're doing. Let's talk about the Democrats, because obviously the Black Lives Matter movement, African American voters as well as Latino voters, made the difference. And the talk now is that the Democrats have to figure out what they're going to do. Are they going to go with a more conservative approach, the old timer approach to being Democrats? They also have a very vocal, newcomers, left wing that would like to see change. I guess if I had to personify it, I'd have to say AOC, right? And Biden, of course, is also trying to reach across the aisle. So how is this all going to play out? Do you see it for the Democrats once they get? I mean, as of January 22nd, I would have to say, if all the the legalities hold, and we can, even if we have to physically remove, Trump from office, out of the Oval Office. I mean, how do you see the Democrats coming together, particularly with what they owe to the to all of these different groups that came out for them, particularly the Black Lives Matter folks, which we've been talking about together?
Yeah, I think this is the central question. Much more important than the fight between the Democrats and the Republicans.
Right.
Because the question is whose agenda is going to prevail in the Democratic Party, because it is split ideologically. And so I think the day after the election, when the blame game was clearly enforced, where you had the more centrist Democrats blaming the more progressive ones for the loss in the House of the number of seats, not gaining in the Senate. To some degree, I think that was seen as an opportunity among centrists to go after the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So many of these folks who did lose were centrists. And the progressive wing of the party increased their numbers in 2020. So anyone paying attention knows that this now becomes a major problem, because many of these progressives are ideologically opposed to some of the neoliberal centrist policies of those who control the party.
Pelosi,
Schumer, Clyburn, yes, you name them. And notice Clyburn joining in the chorus, attacking the progressives, claiming that their, quote, slogans of defunding the police was simply bad for the Democratic Party, and it cost them in the House in the elections. So Clyburn, it was Spanberger who started that, and Clyburn jumped in, and Connor Lamb, another centrist, wrote in the New York Times making this argument. So it was and of course in the media, right? You turn on Morning Joe or something, they were going after the more progressive wing of the party. And to me, I was watching this as a sort of full court press to marginalize these the left wing of the party. And of course, the left wing fought back on this. But I think this is the major fight.
What do you think happened then? Why did these conservative Democrats lose their seats? Is it just because, is it the numbers of folks that voted, or is it they just don't offer a good alternative? I mean, they were replaced with people who are even more conservative than they are, right?
Well, yeah, and I always said, look, why vote a fake Republican when you can vote for a real one? So if you are going to run like a Republican,
Right.
and say I'm not going to get out there and organize and go out there with the people and fight, because we know the vast majority of people are in support of Medicare for all, and this pandemic has clearly pointed out the failure of employer-based health
Right.
insurance, right?
Yeah.
So if you are going to run away from that and not support people who are organizing in the grassroots, then people aren't going to come out in support of you. Instead of going after the same voters that the Republicans are going after, they should think of expanding the base. I mean, that's what Biden did to a large degree, right? I mean, that's why he got so many votes. And there was grassroots organizations on the ground working for him.
Right.
And so and using all types of media also to bring in people. And so many of these centrists didn't bother doing that. I know there's Amy McGrath, who probably would, maybe any Democrat would have lost in Kentucky. But I mean, the fact that she wouldn't even go out to attend the protests of police brutality, I think many people recognize in progressive movement, she's really not for us. So, she's not going to excite folks and bring them out, and they're not going to obviously come out and vote for you. So I think that this is a major problem for the centrists. And this is why I say if they don't do something about this horrible economic crisis that we are facing, we can be facing Donald Trump again or someone even worse in 2024. So, so we're waiting to see what the Biden administration is going to do.
Well, because I'm sitting here listening to you talk, and my question is, so how are we going to resolve this? We're just going to the Democrats are going to tear each other apart. How does the progressive group? They're smaller in numbers. How do they get their point across? Is it going to take the White House to push these centrists into policies and solutions that are going to make all of these new voters happy? Because the big thing is they've got 4 years to pay off on what they in some sense have promised to do, which is to kind of change the country from what it is. And if people don't see that change, why would they come back in the kinds of numbers that they came this time? So how do they do it?
Well, they do it by pushing programs that are really going to
Make a
address
difference.
the needs of people, right?
Right.
So, this pandemic is raging in large part because many cities and we can see this internationally, countries opened up, right? They opened up their businesses, and people were going to restaurants, and people are attending large gatherings and bars and so on. And they did that. They had to open up businesses because people had to survive. So many of those people who were coming out in the street demonstrating against mask policies and shutdowns and so forth, a lot of them were, extremely right-wingers, but some of them were people who just couldn't survive. And they said, listen, we're not getting anything. We're not getting any governmental support and so forth, so we need to go to work. And so Sanders' solution, Bernie Sanders' solution at the beginning was to sort of shut down all the businesses, give workers $2,000 monthly, and so we can deal with this pandemic. Get people,
right.
And make sure we have enough equipment, materials for folks, make sure that people have health care, And that was not taken. I mean, it was a one-time relief of $1,200 for those who were making $75,000 or less. And so what we are witnessing now is this horrifying. Thousands of people, I mean, I saw in Dallas, thousands of cars lining up to a food bank. We see food banks. We see thousands of people coming out. Millions of people are essentially worried about food, going hungry. Millions of people are concerned about whether they're going to have a roof over their head, because there's no guarantee at this point in December keeping people in their houses. And so this is a massive economic crisis that the mainstream media really hasn't been paying that much attention to. I mean, you get drips and drabs of it, but I mean, this is the major crisis.
Well, the Mnuchin,
along with the pandemic, of course, right? So I talk about a sort of, triple pandemic of,
well, it's funny because the right is screaming about socialism, but in some way that may be the only way to kind of save the country economically. I mean, Mnuchin just recently reversed funding, right? He pulled back the funding and some people see that as some sort of way to scuttle the economy for the Biden administration. But, I remember listening to, one of the ways that we could have kind of taken care of some of this if for example, the government paid restaurants to feed people. Right. Because one of the biggest problems we have is the fact that the folks so if a restaurant closes, people who work there are losing their jobs, but also the people that the restaurant buys the food from, they're not selling their food. Now we have these surpluses of food in the farms that aren't moving to market, and will make it more difficult for farmers to grow food next year. For example, what's coming next summer, and food scarcities as far as from a supply perspective. So one of the ways to have kind of kept that cycle going was to pay restaurants to continue to make food and provide that for folks who didn't have any. Right. But if you try to, we're going to try to push that through a Senate, which is barely. Right now it's leaning Republican, right?
Yeah,
Georgia,
that's right.
The Georgia re-election is, what are we going to get out of that? Are we going to be split 50-50 with Harris being the deciding vote, or if let's say both Democrats won, or are we looking at a one vote kind of majority, 51-49, because the House can produce all the programs they want fiscally if they can, given the slight majority there. They're still going to have to get it past the Senate, right?
Well, that's true.
We could be looking at a Senate that is basically trying to make things as hard for the Biden-Harris administration as let's face it, that it wouldn't be the greatest treasonable act we've seen yet.
Right.
So what's to stop them from that? I mean, there's actually something in it for the opposition to put us through 4 years of horror, right?
Well, yeah, that's the danger that we're facing at this point. If the Senate seats in Georgia don't go to the Democrats, right?
Right.
Well, if one goes, they need to win both, obviously, not just one.
And that'll give us what, 50-50?
That's correct. And then with Harris being essentially the head of the Senate, that would give the majority to the Democrats.
She would break the ties.
Right. And the committees obviously would go in the hands of the Democrats.
But I guess since she breaks the ties, they also get to determine who chairs and who sits on what committees.
Right, precisely.
A lot riding on Georgia. I guess that's why Pence was down there telling folks to, to go out and vote as early as possible in as large numbers as possible. What do Stacey Abrams and the political machine that she created down there? I don't see it as a direct connection to Black Lives Matter, but it's certainly a very powerful coalition she's put together as an African American politician.
Yes, that's Georgia went to Biden because of Stacey Abrams, right?
Unequivocally, right?
Yeah, because of voter suppression, and she highlighted this issue and organized because she was obviously a victim because she should be governor.
She's been governor, right?
Of Georgia, not Brian Kemp. But she just didn't lay low. She went out and organized, got people to donate loads of money, got people to register, bring them out to vote in large numbers. And this is what I mean at the beginning. This is how you win, right?
Right.
You definitely go out and you expand the electorate. There are loads of, there are 70 million people, 60 million, 70 million people who just don't bother to vote, who are eligible to vote. So I think that, this is a major problem that we should focus on and not worry about, if someone in the Green Party is running and, third party candidates will get 1 million votes or so, or less than 1 million votes. And so really focusing on going after the same voters that the Republicans go after. What we should be doing is focusing on asking the question, why don't people vote?
Okay.
And how can we get them to come out and vote? And the danger of that, of course, is when you do that, I think you said this at the beginning, you have to deliver something. Right? You have to give something.
You've made promises.
Really get people. That's right.
We're at the half-hour break, station break. So I just want to say you're watching What's Going On and listening. My name's Hugo Fernandez. I'm the host here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. And my guest today, back again, is Dr. Clarence Taylor of Baruch College and the CUNY Graduate Center, who has written many books, including Fight the Power, African Americans and the Long History of Police Brutality in New York City, the Civil Rights in New York City from World War II to the Giuliani Era, and Black Religious Intellectuals, the Fight for Equality from Jim Crow to the 21st Century. Let's talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement and what they should be expecting. I mean, one of the things about Black Lives Matter is that it is decentralized. So, and there isn't like one leader or another, but their role has always been as a social protest in the streets. Do you see any of that translating into, for example, the Biden Harris folks are picking their cabinet now. Should we be expecting folks who were part of that movement to find their way into seats at the table there? Or
I would be extremely surprised,
right,
if they do select folks from Black Lives Matter to be part of the Biden team. I don't think that will be the case. I think what they'll attempt to do is make a lot of noise about police reform.
Right.
And maybe go back to the Obama playbook of consent decrees with police departments, pushing legislation that will outlaw certain practices by the police. But people should remember what Biden said during the campaign when he criticized the defund the police movement and said, I don't want to defund the police movement. I want to, in some cases, increase funding for police departments throughout the country. So, and he did explain what he meant by that. He meant to take sort of innovative action,
Right.
and reforming the departments. They should get some more money to help them along in that process. And the problem I have with that idea is that the police departments, the budgets have increased dramatically throughout the years, in particular when cities were reporting that crime was dropping, it was decreasing, but nevertheless, police budgets were going up. And in addition, police found themselves able to get a lot of military equipment through a federal program that provided them with all this armament, changing the sort of nature of policing. Because policing, peace officers, not a military force. But not enough, they have all this military gear and they were ready for combat. And so I think that if you really don't talk about adequate funding for programs, and a lot of that money will have to come out of, and city budgets will have to come out of money they used to get to police, and start putting that money into mental health, putting into education and so on and so forth, the social programs that we know will help fight crime, right? It's not just policing that fights crime. It's all the important programs that we have, social programs that are crime fighters.
I think that, and I don't remember if it was the Tipping Point or Gladwell who figured out those guys. I forgot the name of. There was a show that they look at data and make something Freakonomics or something that proved or made the case that it was the availability of contraception and or abortion services that led to the drop in unwanted pregnancy, and that had the big impact. Basically 20 years after Roe v. Wade, suddenly we see numbers dropping in crime. And interesting because Giuliani is, of course, in the middle of all of this. Giuliani being the mayor at the time in New York City, when the crime rate was dropping, and trying to make the case, well, it's our stop and frisk, it's our techniques that are doing this. And but other people were making the case that, like you're saying, social programs, and you stop creating the conditions where people have the kind of desperation that they engage in violent acts or theft.
Yes.
You take that away, and suddenly the numbers drop, but then the funding didn't drop with it.
Sure. I mean, giving money to mental health, for example, it's extremely important. But we go back to the 1980s, watch how that was slashed.
Right.
Aid to mental health, federal aid to mental health, starting with Reagan.
Well, you did that in California. I remember I traveled west in the 80s, and San Francisco, was, they basically had a homeless people living in right in front, next to the Capitol, in the kind of a tent city. At the time, the numbers were just so high there. And of course, when he took office, he just kind of spread that policy across the United States, emptying all the mental institutions now, which spiked the homeless populations that we have now.
Right. And we see this now with loads of people now living in the streets.
Right.
Living in New York, you see them in the subways all the time, right? So, you can't just solve that by crime fighting, sending more officers out there to arrest people, because that's not going to work. So this is an important area where the Biden administration can, I think, have an impact. Now, I think that the Biden administration will make some effort in that direction. How much is, no one knows. But it's clearly he's sending a signal out. He's willing to do that, and Harris also. That was also a big issue for her. So he figures he's going to have some influence in shaping policy dealing with, I guess, the homelessness and dealing with mental illness and so on. So.
Yeah, well, it kind of, just talking together, I'm just listening and I'm feeling like for the last, I don't know how many years, feels like 40 years, we've been going in the wrong direction.
Right.
Financially as a society. They're putting all our money into the wrong things. I know that, half of every tax dollar goes to the Defense Department, for example.
Right.
And then another quarter pays for the national debt, at least to keep it, the interest on it, though that number may be higher at this point. And then we're fighting over like a quarter, 25% of the budget to fund everything. Because I know, like, for example, here in New York City, we can't even build a shelter. I mean, the de Blasio administration has, in the 8 years he's been here, hasn't been able to build a new shelter, and we have 60,000 people in the streets in New York City at last count. Though that was pre-pandemic. I don't know what those numbers are becoming now.
Right.
The fact that people can't make rent or mortgage payments.
As
a result of the financial stuff.
Yeah.
So,
it's going to get worse.
Yeah,
I agree with you. And de Blasio, unfortunately, hasn't really addressed that problem in any serious fashion. And I remember hearing de Blasio say that, well, public housing, we tried that, it didn't work. It's really not a good solution. Well, why isn't it a good solution?
Because he gets all his money from developers who don't want them building those in their neighborhoods. I don't think there's a neighborhood in New York City that's willing to allow them to build a shelter in it. Right? It's been the local, and I had made the case that they should be building them on CUNY campuses, because there are CUNY campuses that have a lot of land. We have students that find themselves needing emergency housing, and it's the surest way for them to be unable to finish their degree seeking is to find themselves on the streets. Yes. Food insecurity, housing insecurity are, kind of like this thing that moves through the system that nobody is really prepared to even look at. I remember when they had hired a vice chancellor for fundraising, and when I told her, she asked me, well, how many students do you think are, CUNY students are homeless? And I said 30,000, just to throw out a number based on the size of the population, the percentages of folks who find themselves in housing insecurity, and the size of the homeless population. And she couldn't wrap her head around that. Particularly as a fundraiser to try to find emergency housing for 30,000 students, not including if there are families, these are parents, right?
Right.
Folks and families. So
yeah.
What else do you see the Black Lives Live folks pushing besides the defunding of the police, or at least the focus on how police are funded, if they're going to continue to get funding?
Yeah, I don't think protests are going to end because of the election of Biden, because we're going to I can predict now we are going to see more brutality cases in the future, and so people are going to be out on the streets organizing and pushing the the municipalities as well as state and federal officials to take greater action. The one thing that Black Lives Matter, uh, the environmentalist movement, the Sunrise Movement, and other, the Fight for 15 and so forth. The best thing that they can do is to keep on organizing and protest during the Biden administration. We have to sort of push these folks to really take positions that are in the interest of working class people and not the interest of their donors, not in the interest of those folks with huge money who run the system, right?
So Biden, I think, said that his average donor gave about $48.
Yeah,
so there are small donors. I mean, I know that there are large donors, right? But there are also a lot of small ones, right?
Well, I'm sure that's true, but there are also loads of millionaires and billionaires who gave to Biden, and he's clearly concerned.
And he wants their ear.
Yeah, right. He's more concerned about their concerns and their interests because those are the folks who have the greater influence, right, in helping shaping policy. And this has been true if you look at the history of Joe Biden. Unfortunately, this has been the case with him. You go back and look at that bankruptcy bill, 2005. I mean, that bill, in part, was the bill that he sponsored. That bill was written by those in the credit card industry. I mean, they can sit down and just write the bills and hand it to politicians to give a lot of money to.
Well, it makes it easier, doesn't it?
Yeah,
as far as pleasing them, and makes it easy, the job easier for politicians in a sense.
Well, except then all the folks who are fighting, who are impacted by that bill, right? I mean, we don't have a say in this, and this is I think the big fight.
Well, our students who, I mean, I didn't have a credit card until I went to graduate school. And when I got out of graduate school, of course, I owed as much as you could at the time. And those people got their money out of me. They didn't get it all, but they got plenty of it.
Sure.
Over time. By the way, we're at a quarter. We got about 15 minutes left. I will say, Dr. Riccio, who always mans the Twitch stream, can feel free to send me. Looks like something's going on here. So yeah, she's letting me know that there are no questions, so we can keep going. But just in case any of them do come in, which this is another issue, and I was thinking about this today, that we've got a real crisis going on in higher education, where I mean they're talking. The chancellor was in the Wall Street Journal talking about the record drop in numbers for community colleges, which is unprecedented given what's happening economically. Typically, more people go to school during an economic crisis, but this seems to be different. We're also facing record numbers of student loan debt, higher than ever. I'm not sure what debt is great. Whether it's mortgages, I think it's exceeded credit card debt at this point.
Student debt,
and
yes.
Student debt, and I'm I looked at all of that and I started thinking to myself, is this a chance for the federal government to get out of the business of affording everybody an opportunity to get a college degree? I mean, which I think would be another way for us to shoot ourselves in the foot as a society. But again, a lot of the Black Lives Movement is, what's the average age of somebody in the Black Lives Movement? My guess is it's 20, right? Do we have that demographic?
Yes. Yeah. And they're impacted by student debt. They're impacted, obviously, but we talked about policing. They're probably impacted by the housing crisis that is taking place. They're impacted by the crisis in healthcare.
Right.
So,
I think we finally come to the point where we realized that everybody needs good health care, or not everyone is safe, right? I think
right.
I made this case. For example, you know, convict people who are in who are in prisons are not even entitled to vaccinations, but to not vaccinate them at this point would be suicide, for the, and I'm talking about for the general population, to have a large, what is it, 10% of the population is in prison right now, in the
Yeah.
United States,
Right.
which is not a great figure to have, but to have that many people uninoculated against this thing, who going
Sure.
in and out, not to mention the people that have take care of them.
Right.
It'd be like a breeding ground for a super disease of sorts, right?
Right.
So I think
Right.
we're finally at the place where, as much as they're trying to kill the Affordable Care Act, it would be madness to not make health care available to everyone at this point.
Right. And the way to do that is through single payer. The way to do that is to guarantee that everyone has health care. And unfortunately, that's going to be a major fight, even with the Biden administration. Biden made it very clear that he would veto um, any bill or bill that comes before him calling for health care for all. Obamacare or the ACA did provide health care for loads of people, but there are still millions of people who were without health care. And so, if you're really going to sort of address that problem, we can't talk about just going back to 2009, where you had Obamacare. We got to be much more aggressive in this fight.
And you don't think the Biden plan, for folks to basically choose Medicare as the option, that's going to solve the problem?
Well, you mean with the public option
Right.
that he had mentioned?
Right.
Well, I think it will help millions of people. It's not going to
But
give
it's not single
everybody health.
payer.
Right. It's not single payer. And then, of course, we got in particular the problem with insurance companies still controlling a major portion of the healthcare system. And so you have to worry about rates, and rates did go up.
Well, it's funny because, we just came out of our period here in CUNY where well, I guess everybody is, where you opt in and out of plans. And I live in Connecticut, and our plan through the college, it's very hard to find a doctor outside of the 5 boroughs. And so I said to my wife, maybe we should just pay into some plan, and then we'll have all the options we want. And the number was so staggering that, I would probably be better off just going out of the plan and try to get back whatever I could in that manner. It's so prohibitive. So I don't know how I don't know who's paying for insurance anymore.
Right.
I'm not, if it's not coming through something, in our case, through Emblem Health, Blue Cross Blue Shield, through an employer, in a sense. So,
right. And if you lost your job and you're unemployed,
right, then what?
Right, precisely. So this is the crisis that I think we are facing, and and so the fight within. I go back to my earlier discussion, looking at the fight within the Democratic Party.
Right.
The more progressive members of that party is calling for single payer, so everyone could be covered. loan forgiveness when it comes to student debt, so people will not be burdened with this problem, and actually making public institutions, colleges free, and not charging them tuition. And one other thing I should mention, and I think this is a major fight within the Democratic Party, is the continuation of war, which we haven't really discussed. Now, many of those centrist Democrats support the ongoing U.S. campaigns, where loads of money is going in. We can sort of stop and sort of fund everyone health care if we stop fighting these perpetual wars. And unfortunately, not all the Democrats are on board with that. Many of them voted for the defense bill, the National Authorization Defense Act, where it keeps every year, it just keeps going up by billions of dollars.
Right.
And in large part to help fund these wars. And there are some Democrats on the progressive wing, and I think also you got a Republican like Rand Paul, who's libertarian, who calling into question, why should we be throwing all this money into these programs and into the military when we have all these other problems that we need to take care of. So I think this is also part of that major fight, in order to make sure that people are taken care of in this country.
And that's something that we're not talking about. The media certainly isn't talking about. They're too caught up with all of the, the little games that are being played here after the election, as far as certification, who's controlling, whether or not Biden is getting access. It's turned into a reality television show.
Yeah, that's all it is. That's I mean, I'm astonished when I turned it on, the news, watch one of these stations, CNN or MSNBC, and they're just going on about and not really focusing on what's really impacting people's lives.
Yeah, because I was just thinking as you were talking, I was thinking the dialogue you and I are having right now is a dialogue the country needs to be having and ongoing, and no one's going to give us a chance to do it. But we're running out of time, and I want to, I'm booked through the rest of the season, but starting in the new year, especially as we get closer and even beyond the 21st, I'd like to have you back on to see how this whole thing shakes out. And will we have somebody in the White House as of a new person on the 22nd, and how are they handling what I guess we've delineated as a minefield of issues? Yes. So we got to keep our finger on the pulse, and I'd like to have you back to because you keep me honest. So if you're willing to come back, I'll just wish you a happy Thanksgiving right now, and probably like and happy holidays. And,
yes.
But then you and I will, behind the scenes, will be in touch, and because I'd like to have you on as close to, if not before or after the 21st of January, to see how we've been doing and keep an eye on things.
Okay. Yes, I would love to come back, and yes, happy Thanksgiving to you, and happy holidays, and you got to try to stay safe, right? Tell everyone to stay safe, right?
Psychically, physically, yes, philosophically. Right. So for those of you who've been watching, the show is What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Radio WLGR, and my guest again, Dr. Clarence Taylor. This is his hat trick, his third show with us, from Baruch College and the CUNY Graduate Center, who's been on many times to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and the politics and the civil rights movement and its legacy to us as we see it playing out today. he's written several books, including Fight the Power, African Americans and the Long History of Police Brutality in New York City, Civil Rights in New York City from World War II to the Giuliani Era, and the Black Religious Intellectuals, the Fight for Equality from Jim Crow to the 21st Century. Thank you for listening. Everybody have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks to Dr. Riccio that she travels safely to her family in the South, and to Mr. Pope, our engineer, who will be traveling to be with his brothers near my neck of the woods here in Connecticut. So thanks. And Mr. Pope, take us out as we came in. Bye-bye.